Hello, bună ziua, buongiorno, buenos dias, bonjour, and welcome to the Human Protocol of Avexa podcast. I'm Theodora Savlovschi-Wicks. I'm the founder of Avexa Partners and your host. The idea behind Avexa is pretty simple. We're here to shine a light on the individuals inside the drug development industry. Because whilst we absolutely embrace AI and automation, the tools that free us from the monotonous, the repetitive, the less glamorous corners of work, our focus stays firmly on human interaction. The emotion, the trust, the joy of a new role, the shift that happens inside a team when the right person walks through the door. The Human Protocol sits at the heart of all that. Each episode, we explore the human, either as a professional navigating a career inside drug development, or as the patient at the very centre of the protocol we're all here to serve.
Hello and welcome to the newest episode of the Human Protocol with Avexa Partners podcast. I'm Theodora Savlovschi-Wicks, your host, and today I am joined by the wonderful Dagmar and Ursula, co-founders of Innovation In, a consultancy supporting the industry and beyond, driven by a bold mission to inspire organisations to build proactive, future-ready workplace cultures where innovation, stability and clarity are embedded in how people work and lead. I look forward to learning from them. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Human Protocol over Avexa podcast. I'm joined today by Dagmar and Ursula. Thank you both so much for taking the time. It's taken a little while to put this in the diary, but I'm delighted to finally have the opportunity to sit down with you both. We always kind of start with a brief introduction. So Ursula, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Theo. It's really brilliant to be here. I'm so thrilled that we've finally managed to get it in the diary. So thank you for persisting with that. And it's so interesting the way that, to me that your work aligns with ours. So I'm really thrilled to be having this conversation today. So I'm Ursula Tavender. I'm the co-founder of Innovation In, and I also have another business called The Inclusive Workplace. And my career for the last decade has been devoted to creating a human-first world of work. So I now do that through our approach to people-first AI enablement. And through The Inclusive Workplace, we bring leaders together who are at the forefront of inclusion change to advance the conversation and make sure that inclusion's still on the agenda in this ever-changing world.
Dagmar?
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. Don't know what it is. My name is Dagmar. I'm the co-founder of Innovation In, but my career actually was always in big corporates. So I used to work 10 years in the cosmetic industry for Nivea and then fall in love with an Englishman. And that's how I ended up in the pharma industry, which is quite an interesting switch, but was fascinating. Yeah, now I'm having fun with Ursula. After closing the gender pay gap, I'm trying to close now the gap between human beings and AI, which is widening.
The technology gap, right? I like to say, obviously, you and I have a lot in common, Dagmar. I too fell in love with an Englishman, and that is why I find myself in this country. But on the subject of, obviously, Innovation In, which is the company that you two co-founded. So I guess, how would you describe Innovation In one sentence? That isn't a pitch.
So we specialise in AI enablement for SMEs. I think that's a kind of a one sentence of what we do. We're really excited actually because we've developed a new operating model to take organisations from where they are today, where it's predominantly human first workflows, human only workflows, to AI enabled ways of working. We've done that by building on all of the experiences that we've had together, which I'm sure we'll get into in this conversation. But it feels like a very natural evolution of the work that we've done together to date over the past 7 years, Dagmar, that we've been working together now.
Something like that. Yeah. And I just laugh because we had last week this funny discussion about she talking about SMEs all the time, which stands actually for small and middle-sized businesses, and I was talking to her coming from the corporate world, being slightly brainwashed, like, so why are we working only for subject matter experts? Because that is what I understand about SMEs. So just to clarify, small and middle-sized businesses. But it was really funny how different the language sometimes is, And I would add that we also work with these businesses to actually make sense of this extremely fast change, which is happening everywhere. And it's now even faster with AI, and it's all about redesigning how works and decision and leadership actually operate, because people in performance quite often fall out of sync. That was the case already with the gender and ethnicity pay gap, and it's now getting even worse, I would say.
So I think there's obviously there's a lot to say about how we utilize AI into our day-to-day workflows and how much we may or may not allow AI into the decision-making process in general. But I'm curious, really, what was it that prompted you to kind of start this together? What was kind of the, the catalyst or the founding story? How did you meet? How did you get to be here?
It's a long story. Or it's a short story.
Yeah, well, we started working together when Dagmar was at Pfizer, and our work together was really successful. And Dagmar invited me to become part of a number of the work streams that you were working on, didn't you? And when it came to leave, we decided it would be an absolute travesty for us to stop working together, because I think, this is about humans, right? This conversation is about humans. And it's rare that you find such a connection with somebody in life and in work, especially. And I think that we recognized that we had a really special connection, but also we were able to create incredible work together. And that energy and that connection is something that you don't come across very often. So we wanted to continue that. And that was the spirit in which Innovation in Equity, as it was then, we co-founded Innovation in Equity originally as a way to continue the work that we had done to close pay gaps and support organisations to develop more equitable structures. And then eventually that we rebranded last year as Innovation In to accommodate the growth of our work and the natural evolution of our work into People First AI.
Fantastic. It's I guess, it is, as you say, it's quite rare that you find individuals that you're on the same wavelength with, right? And you complement each other's knowledge and working styles so well, and you can build something truly special. What would you say people first transformation actually looks like in an organization that is kind of resisting it? And I guess as a follow-up question, really, when we speak about SMEs in particular, do you think they perhaps have less access to faster innovation than the large corporate environments that can afford investing in it perhaps more?
I really think it's tricky in large organization because they go through so much change and so much change management, so many restructurings. At one point, I call it the French attitude, because they do this, at one point, and seen it all, done it all, will go away anyway. So they really don't massively engage with it, and because there's so much corporate speech, I think it's harder there, and sometimes, and it really usually starts with acknowledging the resistance rather than trying to override it, right? And I think that's easier in small companies than in big companies. Or middle-sized companies. What often is labeled as resistance, I think, is quite often this whole thing about they don't know what
They don't know.
what they don't know, and what good actually looks like. Some English words I can't say anymore. They don't trust the system to be fair. There's this whole fear, loss of competence and identity. I think that's actually exaggerated in the moment with AI, because it's so fast. It's just like so alien, really, right? And I think there's a lot of that going on. So I think it all starts with actually restoring orientation, really giving clarity, and what is actually the end of the journey. How is it going to look like? What's our vision? How might it look like? Even though we don't even know that yet because it's so fast. Does it make sense what I'm waffling around here?
I think you're onto something really important there, Dagmar, because what we notice very often is that there is a real lack of clarity at a leadership level, and that filters down everywhere. And I think to a certain extent, SMEs are in an advantageous position, because they are more agile. They're able to be more agile than the bigger corporate businesses, right? And because of that, what they can do is they can consult their people. They can really enable their people's voices to be heard on a much I guess, more like down to the minutiae scale, because they've got fewer people, they've got more access to those people. Whereas in larger organizations, it's much more difficult to and much more cumbersome to engage in an activity which will really ensure that everybody's voice is heard. It's obviously possible, and larger organizations do an incredible job of that. I think because larger organizations have the people infrastructure to be able to devote resource to this work of change, which SMEs don't necessarily always have so much of, depending on their size, of course. There's swings and roundabouts. I think there's advantages to be able to move quicker as a more agile, smaller business. But also, in larger corporates, they've got more resource, so they can, engage in more listening potentially. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. I think that's what we're
Yeah.
arriving at, isn't
Yeah.
it? Is that it's a really mixed bag. But what we would say, we always, our approach is always to start with that clarity and that kind of strategic level conversation at a leadership level to make sure that everybody is aligned on ultimately what is AI for in this business? What is this change for us? What does it mean for us? And as Dagmar says, what does success look like?
My favorite
Absolutely.
sentence can come in now, like, if you don't know where you're going, how do you know that you have actually arrived?
Yeah.
I think it's such a powerful
Absolutely.
sentence. I absolutely love that one.
Understanding the destination before you start the journey, right?
Hmm.
And it often gets missed. People jump in because I think especially when things are so fast moving, you've got a huge, chasm of difference between the ways that people are engaging with AI technologies. There's, a lot of shadow AI happening where there is no direction yet from businesses, particularly smaller businesses, where they don't yet have a strategy. We're starting to see some businesses developing a strategic approach to embracing AI, but still there's a lot of it being owned by one team, particularly the technological team within the business. So people aren't involved yet. And we've spoken to even larger SMEs that are yet to understand the connection between the people aspect of this transformation and the technological aspect and marry the two together.
Absolutely. But do you think a lot of it is actually also, it's such an overwhelming, noisy space right now, right? And we have so many tech providers promising the world. I know since I started Vivexa in November, I probably get about 5 to 10 pitches every single week from different AI tech stacks promising, they're going to do it all for me. They're going to outsource this, outsource that. Better this, better that. They're going to improve my ROI by 373% to be exact. And I think but it's also when you don't have enough experience with it, it's quite easy, right? To get a little bit lost and kind of look after every shiny little thing that comes your way, right? And what do I try? What do I do? And do we almost go to the other end where we start trialing everything and we actually forget to do the actual work or what the purpose of it is, right?
I think it really depends on the individual, doesn't it? Because you can easily get sucked into a rabbit hole of that, there are tools for everything.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's why we go back to the clarity piece, because, if you have a clear aim for what you either as a function or as a business, what you need to achieve, and you bring in the right expertise to be able to help you understand what it is that AI can do to support those goals, that can help reduce that overwhelm, because the number of tools is infinite and the potential and the capability is now so it's not just rapidly advancing, but it's already established. So that makes the digital gap very big in some circumstances, particularly at leadership level, and it's really a big problem. But that AI capability gap is a really big emerging problem among senior leaders, because they are either paralyzed by the choice, or overwhelmed with, a number of different options. And that can manifest in ways which do have a detrimental effect on the overall business and on the team. So, it is a real issue, isn't it? And I think how you deal with that is really dependent on who you are as a person and how you deal with that overwhelm and that paralysis.
Absolutely. So talking about, a lot of leadership and perhaps a lot of the individuals not necessarily knowing what to do with it, I guess, what would you say is probably the most common thing that professionals get wrong when it comes to managing their career in this particular environment and in this super fast paced, ever changing industry?
I think a lot of people making still a lot of assumptions, and a lot of people think or assume that someone else is curating their relevance, which I find quite fascinating. And a lot of professionals I talk to and I speak to, they're still optimizing their own role, right? Rather than looking at the things which are really important, which is curiosity, in my opinion, adaptability, empathy, judgment, and did I mention agility already? Can't mention that often enough. I think this is way more important these days, and they start to focus on skills, but that is changing so fast, that there are other
Softer
things,
skills.
softer skills, which are more important now, in my opinion, and because these roles now, they mutate much, much faster than role descriptions. I don't think role descriptions, they are usually anyway, as you know, quite often utter nonsense, but now they are getting really old-fashioned, and all these, I think for me in the moment, mindset and attitude is what really counts, rather than what kind of experience you have, blah, blah, I think that's way more important in the moment. Don't know. What do you think, Ursula?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you said. I think, it's very important to remember that in a world where there is so much noise around jobs being taken, if not soon, then eventually by AI technology, that the human side of work and our human qualities will never be replaced by, no matter how sophisticated AI becomes. And those qualities of relationship building and influence, and how we build our visibility, how we mentor others, how we lead, how we make decisions, how we build culture, and how we maintain those ethics around what we do every day. If we can concentrate our effort as professional people on developing those capabilities, then establishing a partnership with AI tools and technologies, plus those unique human skills, strengths and capabilities, is where we'll be able to supercharge our career growth in the next however many years. I think that's a big, it's a core part of future-proofing our value, right? Is, how do we upskill ourselves so that we can keep abreast of technological development and make sure that those digital divides are not exacerbated, but also how do we really focus on those areas where we bring something very unique to the table. And I think that, that combination is where people can supercharge their relevance.
Yeah, it comes back to curiosity for me, testing, learning, adapting all the way through. And my favorite tool, which we quite often teach in one of our workshops, which is like, what is really the worst that can happen, and how realistic is it, And if you go along these lines, and you start to test and you learn, and you adapt, and you're not afraid, because what really can go wrong, I think that is what needs to happen more and more now, right? And I think I hope people can get, and again, for me, that's a mindset, just starting and playing really. So there's a whole theory 100%. Of play too. So it actually gives you, in the moment, which is quite a positive in my opinion, the opportunity to play a bit more around, which usually you're not allowed to in bigger companies or small companies. I like that.
I think I think, if I may add my opinion, I know I've asked you the question, but I've got opinions on this, and I must also me opinions. I think we're also in a space, obviously we've got 5 generations in the workspace right now that all embrace or look at AI in very different ways, and who are all brought up in different ways from a culture of work perspective and ethic of work. And I think what I am seeing right now from a recruiter's perspective, I'm seeing an awful lot of people who have been perhaps a little bit too loyal to, their previous corporations, to the previous teams, who kind of did what they were told, who, sat in their little lane, there was nothing wrong with it. It's what we were all taught really up to a certain point in life, right? Do as you're told, you will be seen, your time will come. Don't be too loud, don't make a fuss of it, you will be seen, you will be given the next promotion, you will be given the next project, and so on. However, I think, unfortunately, those will be at the moment the type of individuals and careers that are the hardest to adapt to this current marketplace, right? Because if you've spent 15, 20 years within a single organization, within a single business unit, you haven't demonstrated curiosity, agility, flexibility. You haven't really experienced anything but those specific SOPs, that specific team culture, that specific, corporate structure. And it is increasingly difficult for you then to demonstrate that adaptability and to learn and to play, because you never learned how to play outside of your lane.
Yeah, because it's not convenient, is it, for that traditional structure for people to think outside of it, and it's not necessary. So I think that's all part of this evolution, isn't it, into this new frontier, really, which has been, we stood on the precipice of it at the start of COVID, right, where we demanded agility from people in a way that had never been expected of them before, and that's continued. And I think that what I see is two very definite schools of thought or definite camps of people where, there has been a real sort of capitalization on that moment to play and to be curious and to develop those proactive ways of being and taking ownership over your own skills growth and career development rather than waiting for opportunities to present themselves, versus those who have, stayed on a hope and a prayer. It's kind of it's there are differences, and there are definite generational differences and mindset differences, and you're absolutely right about that. But what's really fascinating to me is that among those, both of those groups of people, the fact remains that if you do just take the approach of your head down, work hard, and success will come, that's been proven many, many times over to be completely false. So it actually, creating a career that looks, whatever your version of success looks like for you, to achieve that, we need a combination of visibility and proactive sharing. So self-advocacy and proactive sharing of the work that we do. We need to be able to build visibility so that the right people see the work that we do, because we assume we're very self-focused, right, as human beings, and we naturally assume that our work is obvious and that success will follow as a result of the obvious work that we do. And that's just not the case at all. So working hard is absolutely imperative. I'm not questioning that in the slightest, but we do need to push ourselves to be more visible, to amplify our own achievements, to be able to talk about what we do in a way that is fact-based, and that forms a lot of the career development work that we have done historically is all around supporting people to build those self-advocacy and those ownership skills over their own career visibility and their own strategic growth. Because without that combination of visibility and personal branding and talking about our achievements, getting seen in the right places and getting heard in the right rooms alongside that hard work, that's how career success happens.
Yeah, but I think that is now more important than ever, because now it's really interesting, because now with AI and all these Claude and ChatGPT and Copilot, there's a real danger that performance reviews get really confusing, because there might be a lot of senior leaders who actually do not look into quality of work any longer. If you don't talk about it in particular, but more about the speed, and speed is not necessarily the quality, right? And it's nice to work with a pilot, but you still need to have a lot of human proper input in it, right? Data in, data out, and the quality of data plays a huge role, and that comes from us, the human beings, right? So if you're then on top are not able to talk about what you have achieved, then it's getting really, really difficult to be seen, right? Or to be seen for what you really have achieved. So it can go very, very quickly wrong, because performance is not necessarily about speed. It's about the quality of the output you're producing.
100%. So obviously we still absolutely need that human element, right? And the critical thinking, which I think, is harder and harder to identify these days.
Well, it is, but there are ways of being
Mm.
really, strategic about that, and that's a lot of the work that we do and what we're seeing working really well is when guardrails and principles are
Mhm.
put in place that determine within a team when oversight is needed, when we need to use our judgment, what AI is used for and what it is not used for.
Yep.
And I think when you give people that understanding, and you can ask for that, if you're working in a team where you're not in a position to be able to put that kind of thing in place, be proactive, to use that as an opportunity to take that to your leaders and say, we need this structure, because again, going back to the point about shadow AI, most people are using AI even if they're not being open with their employer about what they're using it for. Where's your data going? Where's the governance? Where's the the risk strategy around the sensitive information that's being fed into AIs? And that's a whole kind of different conversation about the risk appetite and tolerance within a business for that kind of governance. But yeah, it's
Minefield.
it's a fascinating. It is a minefield. It is a minefield. But I think as I say, what we're seeing working really well, and this is something which is not new. It's not rocket science, but putting those guardrails in place is a way to identify where we as humans add the most value, where, as you said right at the beginning, Theo, our repetitive tasks, our admin, reporting, those things that people have been experimenting for on a widespread way of, reducing the administrative burden after meetings, for example. It's an easy one. Support with drafting email, first drafts of research, that kind of thing. It's a no-brainer for AI to be able to support with those tasks. But beyond that, as you say, there are tools that can help with absolutely everything within a specific role and a specific team and a specific function. So what would that look like? And that's why team conversations are such an important part of this transformation, because people have always known what will help in their role if you ask them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
If you ask them, I think
if you ask them,
that's probably one of the biggest parts of it, right? If you
they've got
ask
all the answers.
But that is what I find so fascinating is, I think I wrote a LinkedIn post about that lately, is that coming from a background as customer experience, right, and customer insights, companies spend millions, billions on that kind of stuff, generating customer insights and new ideas and innovation and rah. But they hardly ever do any employee journeys or employee insights or anything like that. And I found that really fascinating, because without your employees, you literally don't go anywhere, right? So it's really, really fascinates me massively that they spend so much money on customer insights and customer experience, but not on employee experience, other than every now and then a little bit of a questionnaire where they do some pulse checking or whatever, however they call it, which is anyway not, depends on how you ask the questions too.
I could talk about that at quite some length in my experience.
Again, that's another future episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I see some follow-ups here in our future. But I think, there's a lot of tension at the moment, right, in the way we when we speak about the way we utilize AI. And specifically, I think there is a huge amount of tension around using AI to scale and then losing that human judgment to make a great hire, or decide, who gets promoted, or, how we collect the data, and how much do we give AI access to? How much do we let it do for us? And where does it become a burden rather than a support?
Yeah, I
So
would
that
say depends,
yeah, that is a big question. And I think it's one that only leaders within a business can answer. And as a kind of collective conversation within that business, there isn't a one size fits all answer to that question. And I think that's the difficult thing about this entire conversation, is there is no here you go, here's a clean process to follow, because every organization is different. You've got different levels of maturity, you've got different personalities navigating these transformations, and I think that makes it quite complex. So yeah, there isn't it will look different for everybody, and that's okay, but I think it also makes it a bit more difficult, really, infinitely more difficult actually, because it is, you can't sit here and say here's the answer.
Yeah, and I think what is AI really for? I mean, and we talk here about language models and stuff like this, because AI is such a vast thing. We are not even tapping into it, and it exists already since the 50s, doesn't it? What AI should do, and what we talk about, is it's absorbing repetition and should do this pattern recognition, right? So that we as humans can focus more on interpretation and ethics and trade-offs and stakeholder impact and all that kind of stuff, But again, that only works, like Ursula said, if organizations really clearly define where judgment actually sits. So I think that's where it starts, and reward it then also visibly, because I don't think that there's a risk that AI is replacing judgment, not at all, because we will always do that as human beings, but organizations are at risk to fail to protect, I think, and to value the judgment, especially once the output is starting to accelerate even faster and faster. That's
well, then there's the point around then there's the point around bias, because ultimately if systems are biased to begin with, then all AI does is amplify and accelerate and extend those biases, right? So, if you are able to examine systems for bias before scaling, then, that's the ideal, isn't it? But at any point, systems can be taken apart and examined for bias. But, it needs a multi-stakeholder approach to do that, because if we have the same people sitting around the table, then now we're getting into the sort of D&I lens, which is a really interesting angle for us, because our work originated with the goal of creating more equitable structures within the workplace, right? And that's the way we approach this phase of our work, is how do we ensure that we scale AI enablement in a way which ensures and protects equity for everybody? And that is a minefield, because systems and tools at the moment, in the main, I'm speaking broadly, but in the main, they are bolted into existing workflows. Our approach is to reverse engineer the workflows. So we redefine and reimagine how work happens and how decisions are made, putting those guardrails in place so that the systems are inherently equitable to begin with. Whereas at the moment, what's happening as tools are kind of retrofitted into, they're sort of bolted onto existing workflows, all that's going to happen is biases are going to be amplified. And your example of recruitment is a great one.
Yeah, so I think before we actually start recording, right, we were talking about the fact that there's this argument, right, oh, have I been auto-rejected by AI, right? And quite often you're not, because nobody actually lets AI auto-reject people on their behalf or candidates on their behalf. However, if you do have a scoring system in place and you're looking at 200 applications, 10 of them have been scored a 9 out of 10, and then you have 90 of them that have been scored 2 out of 3, I'm pretty much 100% certain that nobody will sit there and read every 2 out of 10 CVs and decide to move forward, because you're looking at something that is already biased for you, right? And it's kind of made a decision on your behalf. All you do is click the button, and then the decision wasn't human. The decision was made, by AI. And I think ultimately where the ethical issue, there's obviously huge ethical implications here, right? But we deal at the moment with an awful lot of individuals who never built the skill of looking for a job, because prior to these last couple of years, a lot of people in middle and upper management who find themselves displaced in this current job market never really had to proactively pursue a new opportunity. They were previously sought after. They were headhunted. They were contacted. They never really had to trawl the whole of the internet and figure out how to write their CV. And then they've got so much conflicting advice at the moment. Use ChatGPT, pay somebody $5,000 to write your CV for you. And those are absolute jackals that I abhor. But they are confused. And then I think you have somebody who's worked at Pfizer for the past 15 years, who was displaced last year, who hasn't written a CV in 15 years, who's completely overwhelmed, who either sends you a 20-page long CV or sends you an AI written CV because somebody told them this is what needs to happen. And in either of those scenarios, it will probably be scored quite low. But they will probably have some really fantastic experience that they just don't know how to put on paper, how to put in their applications. So those people will automatically be taken out of the process. I think this is where the biggest issue is. We have AI speaking with AI to a certain degree, and the actual human communication is becoming obsolete at that level, because ultimately we still have jobs to fill and we still have candidates who need jobs. Yet somehow we still have jobs to fill and we still have candidates who need jobs.
Yeah, it's one extreme to the other, isn't it? We've almost arrived at a point that's an extreme example, but where we've lost that balance between the human, what AI can do for us and how it can support processes, but remove the human element, which totally bastardizes the process, right? So
Absolutely.
I think these mistakes are kind of inevitable with any sort of massive change. We saw it after COVID, when some organizations moved to a kind of work from anywhere. They went with an extreme form of flexibility, which works for some organizations very, very well, and in others it wasn't led very well. So it didn't. It was one extreme to the other. So with any kind of radical change to ways of working, there are always these teething issues and this continuum of learning. And I think Dagmar, you talked about testing, learning, and adapting, and that is always our advice with any business that is trialing human and AI partnership ways of working. Is set up low risk pilots where you can assess the impact, because I think if you move straight off to a process which is so radically different, then you've got, like, as you say, we hear this a lot in focus groups and in other, because I was doing a keynote a couple of weeks ago and there was a number of businesses in the room talking about their recruitment processes, talking about exactly this topic of, people are effectively creating AI generated applications to get through the AI driven process. And we've also got the problem of younger applicants who then get to interview and are not equipped with the communication skills to be able to stand on their own 2 feet in an interview and to get through that process. And it's a whole it's a whole can of worms, that process, isn't it? So yeah, it's really interesting time from that point of view. If you look at the human lens, it's a really, really interesting time, isn't it?
It truly is. And I think, it is not just individuals who perhaps amplify their experience, right? But it's actually, there's a lot of fraudulent applications that are happening on certain niches and parts of the market. And these are areas, that have had fraudulent applications since the beginning of time to a certain degree. But now they're getting smarter, they're getting more agile. They too are AI enabled, and they are getting very, very good at fraud. And it's even harder to detect it earlier on. So it's becoming more and more complex when it comes to recruitment, and it's not something that necessarily every job seeker would understand. That actually, and I get why people feel so negatively towards recruitment teams at times. And it's easy, kind of, to a certain degree, right, to kind of sit there and look, I've looked at LinkedIn, it's had 300 applications, I got an automated rejection 3 hours after I applied, a bot rejected me. But the reality is, you've got somebody who works on 40 requisitions that each have 200 applications, that doesn't have the bandwidth to review manually 200 CVs per application. So the question, I guess, that we're all trying collectively to resolve is, how do we marry the two? How do we make the process equitable? How do we, take the bias out of it, but also support our own teams when it comes to recruitment capacity? How do we reach that balance in between where we both offer a good candidate experience and candidates understand why they've been rejected, but also protects our internal talent acquisition and recruitment teams from burnout as well? Because no human can actually process that many CVs at any given time, and it's impossible to give every single applicant feedback as to why their application was rejected, as much as we'd love to, right?
Yeah, of course. And that's where the trialing comes in to me, is, you know, trialing different approaches, and researching what is happening in your sector and outside of your sector as well, because I think that peer-to-peer sharing and exchange of knowledge and ideas and experiences, and here's what worked and that didn't work for us, and, you know, here's the corner that we can help you to cut because of us sharing our experience. I think get out there, find out what is happening in your sector and outside of it, because, you know, it is about experimentation, and we need to develop a mindset of experimentation for this, to meet this moment, because, you know, there is no defined pathway, and with things changing so rapidly, there's always room for shifting and changing. And I think that is for some people, especially, you know, if you sit at the, you know, intersection of age and career stage and experience, and even down to the sector, that tolerance for experimentation varies massively. But I think if you can take that approach, that you know, be willing to learn and keep your knowledge up to date of what is happening, and then be prepared to experiment with different ways, and you will find an approach that works better. Because, you know, from what you're describing, that sounds like it's not working, you know, for people at both ends of the process. It's about being experimentational, isn't it? You know, and being adventurous with the way that we do, and being prepared to sort of be quite, I don't know if you've always talked about like out of the box thinking, and it's really boring, but, you know, it does require that, you know, and we've got tools that can help us to think differently now. We can, you know, use them to find ways that are broader than our own perspective. And that's really exciting.
Absolutely, yes. I think, statistically speaking, I think under 50% of professionals really have used AI at work over the last 6 months or so. Despite all of us, you know, kind of collectively constantly talking about AI, why do you think adoption is still low?
Because, as you said, there's so much noise out of there. I mean, look at in LinkedIn, it really does my head in. And I think noise creates pressure and not confidence. And I think that's one part of the crux, you know. And also, again, because there are no guardrails, quite often no guardrails or anything in place, you know. People are really unsure. So what's allowed, what's expected? I mean, they don't even know what's expected, you know, and that is really bad, you know. Or how the use of AI even will be judged, because we are judgmental, you know, that's how we are, you know. And I even met some teams who said, so I'm a communication specialist, that's my job, I know best how to write something, you know, and actually AI is cheating too, so that's a completely different lens, you know. But if you have unclear standards, you know, then people start to self-regulate. Right. And what I see, what is really fascinates me, you know, within this HBA where you and I are actually both volunteering for, I see a lot of the younger people, before they do anything wrong, they rather don't do anything. And I find that whole attitude really fascinating too, right? Because I'm having this, right, I ask for forgiveness and not for permission kind of attitude still, right? But I'm also a bit older, so that makes it easier. And I personally, you know, don't give a talk what people think about me anymore, which is very, very helpful and very liberating, actually, you know. But the younger generation, because of all the pressure and because everything is so hard and because there's so many assumptions out there and because everything is so much more visible and the social media can go on and on and on and on here, I think that's one of the reasons. And it's just too much, you know. The pressure is too much. And that really robs you on confidence. I mean, look at the younger generation. They're all dressed in the same way. I think that also comes from peer pressure.
Yeah, I
There's
mean,
also,
I think, you know, I was going to say, I also dressed like everybody else did in the 90s and in the 90s, you know.
But that's what you do, you know. It takes a long time until you find yourself and self-confidence, you know. And also to overcome this, what your parents tell you, particularly my mother, what will the neighbors think, you know, this whole attitude thing. So, yeah.
So what's also really fascinating is the data that's emerging around the differences in the ways that people are engaging or not with these technologies based on their gender, based on their race, based on their socioeconomic status, based on their neurodiversity or disability, their age. And there are differences that are staggering. If you happen to be a woman who is over 45, you're about 50% less than your male counterpart to confidently use AI in the workplace. And so this is what we talk about so much, with the differences and the divides in the ways that colleagues are engaging with these technologies, because without a strategic approach to, like, a bespoke learning pathway almost for everybody in place, which we haven't, that's not widespread yet, but it will be. And that's one of the things that we advocate, is creating these personalities, or these kind of avatars, profiles within your colleague population as a leader, that identify how people feel about using these technologies. Because there are, as you've so clearly outlined, Dagmar, there's issues with different levels of trust and confidence and risk tolerance, and all of those kind of different aspects that dictate whether somebody is likely to think, well, if I use this and it's obvious that I use it. We were at a conference recently where somebody said, I have in my email footer, a disclaimer that I don't use AI, like everything is authentically me. This is just me. I won't use it. And so, it's an interesting angle, isn't it? When so many processes now are being changed to incorporate, and so many workflows are rightly, being adapted to be more efficient and sped up. And, I think you see the same pattern over the course of history, right? You look at when email was introduced, or when computers were, when fax machines were introduced, there's all this hype and noise around, we're done for. And then things settle down and they adapt and they change, and, people realize that it's not the end of humanity. So it feels like, that's without underestimating the scale of this change, which is obviously unprecedented and, not like anything else that we've seen within any of our lifetimes. I do think there is a real benefit in understanding the differences in the ways that people are approaching this and the different mindsets that they have, because that tells us so much about how we can support them to and increase that engagement.
But I think if leaders start to actually to admit uncertainty, which is of course very hard, but I think that's a good starting point. It's just like, I don't know either. It's just learn and it's just like start to experiment. And just also normalizing learning. I think that would help massively. And take everybody with you on the journey. I mean, when we introduced how to work flexibly properly back at Pfizer to close the gender pay gap, it was the same thing. As you said, you have 5 generations at work, and people have totally different attitudes and idea how to work flexibly, how do you meet the individual need with the team need and the business need, and we had of course some people who'd been very cheeky, who said, okay, great, that means I can now take every Monday afternoon off and go cycling. No, you can't. That's just that's not flexible working, and flexible working doesn't mean
just not working.
yeah, exactly. That we can come inflexible, and you had some elderly ladies, particularly admins, who said, no, I can't do that, and who'd been all the time like, so I can't even go and make myself a cup of tea, or I can't even go to the loo, because that is the moment when my leader will call me, and then I will get caught out. So that's not what it is about, and this whole rethinking what is actually work, it's not about how many hours you work, it's actually what outcome you produce. And the fascinating thing is we see all the same similarities happening with AI now. It's not how fast you work or how much more you can do, it's the quality of the output you're producing, actually. Just because you work a bit faster doesn't mean it's better.
And that's why the guardrails are so, and the adoption principles are so important, in the same way that they were with flexibility, because
Absolutely.
it gives people that virtual permission slip, that sort of psychological safety to be able to experiment. And it all starts with that leadership clarity and that those kind of, what is AI for? What are we using it for? What are we not using it for? And
What's the
when
purpose,
does
right?
human oversight matter? When, can AI take care of decision making, and when is it not appropriate for that to happen? And I think those starting there is key to increasing that that engagement among the population, raising those numbers of people that do confidently feel that they can experiment with AI and not feel like it's cheating, and not feel like they trust it, because the lack of clarity and the lack of direction is where, people are looking to leadership right now to say, we don't have answers to these questions. I feel like I should use this on my personal laptop, but not on my work laptop. We've got a few co-pilot licenses that are sort of scattered among key people in the business, but they happen to be early adopters. So what's happening to the, the people who are not among those early adopter cohorts?
And
Pilots are relying on volunteers, which naturally the people who are not inclined to be the first to engage are naturally self-selecting out of those processes, and we're hardwiring bias into the adoption process.
Yeah, and for me, again, like flexible working, one of the biggest problems with working flexibly properly is actually burnout, and not that the work is not getting done really. And I can see that now here too, because I spoke lately to somebody who said, I'm totally overwhelmed because everything is so much faster. I'm getting more and more and more work dumped on me, right? So instead of having time then to do thinking work, they're getting more and more other tasks on top, So again, you need to watch out that people don't burn out because they have the feeling they need to do more and more and more and more, and never rest or never take time off. Same as with flexible working. And I need to put a bit more thinking behind that, what's really going on there. But it's kind of emerging already, which is fascinating too.
Absolutely. I spoke to somebody the other day who said, I've just spent the whole weekend playing around with Claude, and I've done so many dashboards, and I've analysed so many things, and I've fed it so much data, and it was absolutely fascinating. I said, okay, wow, what business need has that addressed? It's like, none, but it was great. And he's just learned that he can do so much more with it, but really it hasn't actually aided him in his day-to-day job. But it was fascinating, right? So that's probably taking the plane to the other extreme.
But do you know what? I think that is so valuable, and that's a really valid point, because having the time to experiment is where confidence is built.
Yes.
And that mindset develops, right? So the companies that are giving their people an hour a week in a learning lab, a drop-in session, to be able to experiment, to talk to other colleagues who happen to be able to build agents or whatever it might be that they're, have done that experimentation, that person has taken it on themselves to do that. If that's led by the business and you are given that time, again, it, changes your mindset about how to engage, how to, it's that psychological safety is it's another building block of that permission to experiment, make mistakes. If there's a clear message from leadership that we are going to be embracing more of these technologies, so we want you to innovate, we want you to be part of this shift with us, it stands to reason that you're going to build higher levels of confidence. It sends a very strong message, doesn't it? But if that's happening in the shadows with no purpose, no clarity of direction, there's risk. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. And what I tend to ask majority of the guests I've had so far, who just also happen to be entrepreneurs, is what has entrepreneurship taught you about yourself since you started on this journey?
Good question. I'm speechless. It doesn't happen very often, huh? I think
nothing. I knew it all.
No, I think trusting each other is really non-negotiable. I think because we're doing it together, right? And I think trust is a huge, huge thing, and that is absolutely the one thing which is absolutely non-negotiable, right? And never making assumptions, and just asking for help, if you have, I think that's also important in the moment you're like, because I come from the corporate world. Ursula has much more experience being an entrepreneur. She's doing it much longer than I am, but also because we are totally different personalities, but do have exactly the same values. And I found that interesting. Having the same values really made us click and makes us work so well together, right? And I think we feed from each other in a really nice way. And the way we work together is just pleasant. It's just non-stressful. It's just really so lovely that it's actually fun, and I wouldn't work any longer with people who are too aggressive or where I put down the phone afterwards and think, so I don't want to have this experience anymore, That's why I left the corporate world. Don't know, does it make sense what I'm saying here?
Absolutely, yes.
I think for me, it's all of that. But if you zoom out a little bit, it's about the point you made for me is about independence and interdependence, because I grew up thinking I had to do everything myself and had a strong sort of idea that, it was about individualized perfectionism, if you know what I mean.
Definitely.
And I've been recovering from that for a very long time. So aligning with the right partnerships is such an accelerator, because if you try and do everything yourself, you're slowing yourself down. That's just my experience and my view. So when I have found these partnerships that, as you say, Dagmar, are so in sync in terms of values, like we are yin and yang, like we could completely night and day, but we complement each other so beautifully. And it is because of the fact that fundamentally at our core as people, we share the same values. And because of that magical combination in a partner of same values but different skills, that is an accelerator. So choosing the right partner in an entrepreneurial sense is an absolute accelerator. And that's been a really big learning for me, because I had in my head, not even consciously, just that, it was all on me. And so learning that it isn't, and that I can rely on other people, and I can allow, I can stand in my own lane and then let others, I don't have to be good at everything. That's, that's really goes against a lot of the messaging, I think, about
I think it's
entrepreneurialism.
for us type A perfectionists in recovery, it's a very hard lesson to learn, to ask for help, and also delegation, and understanding that if you want something done right, you don't just have to do it yourself.
Well,
But also having the gut saying, if you realize that with somebody else it doesn't work, having the guts to stop, and in time, and also learning to be a bit more selfish, to see what's good with whom you really want to work and what you really want to do, and just be on your toes all the time. Again, test, learn, adapt, because our business in between was at a dead end because of the geopolitical situation, and then we had to reinvent ourselves. We had to change from innovation equity to innovation in, and we could do that because we have such an open relationship. We talk about everything very openly, and because we make risk mitigation all the time through. So we're always proactive. We're never reactive, So it wasn't. So we thought, okay, that's an opportunity, It's not a disaster. We could have gone into doom and gloom, but we just turned it completely around very, very quickly, and there was never any negativity about it.